Good morning. Again, it's 6:11, and here we are, and we're into the Word, wrapping it up with Jeremiah this week, and it's been it's touched my heart, and I hope that you've been blessed as well. We will be finishing up with Jeremiah this week. I didn't really hear any ideas on some other studies, so next Monday we're going to do another study, but we're going to combine everything that we've have been attempting to do from the beginning of 6:11. We're going to take the whole expository approach. Remember that? That's that verse by verse, line upon line, precept upon precept. And then we're going to look at a character, and we're going to do an entire book. And you're like, man, that's going to take a long time. Not really, because we're going to look at Jonah. Jonah and his relationship with Nineveh. Remember, Nineveh was about to be destroyed, and it took God chose the prophet Jonah to go and make a difference. And it also seems that, as you look at Nineveh, it might be that we learn some things, some parallels with our own country and our own times, and it gives us hope that there are still people that may repent and hold off the judgment of God on a people. So we're going to look at Jonah starting next Monday, and but we're going to wrap up Jeremiah now. So good morning, everybody joining on. Let's kind of get into our study. I'm going to start with where I kind of finished a little bit yesterday in the book of Jeremiah. There was this question I had: How did Nebuchadnezzar hear about Jeremiah? Because remember, yesterday we go to the texts, and Nebuchadnezzar specifically names Jeremiah, and he tells his captain of the guard, his right-hand man, you're to go find Jeremiah, you're to rescue him, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, and you're to do whatever he says. How did he know of Jeremiah? I think we may have stumbled into a clue. So we're going to look at that real fast, and then we're going to go to Lamentations. So we come over here to this text that is in Jeremiah 51, verse 59. And notice here, we're at the end of Jeremiah, all that's taken place. And the word which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Seraiah, the son of Neriah, the son of Messiah, when he went with Zedekiah, the king of Judah, into Babylon in the 4th year of his reign, and this Seraiah was a quiet prince. Now, it's speculative. It's one of those things that I hope happens not just to me, but to a lot of people. When you have questions and you ponder them, and then the Holy Spirit kind of draws you to something, and you're like, wow, that's really cool. I wonder. And so what we have here then is, notice that phrase again, when Seraiah goes with Zedekiah to Babylon in the 4th year of Zedekiah. Now, Zedekiah reigns 11 years before he is put down, and he's then blinded. We talked about that. He's carried on to Babylon, and he dies in captivity. Okay, we never hear any more about Zedekiah. But here, Jeremiah is writing this Seraiah, and there's some interesting things going on here. So, number one, notice his father, Neriah. Neriah shows up throughout the book of Jeremiah, but he shows up as Barak, the son of Neriah. And Barak is like a very close confidant to Jeremiah. He's like his assistant. So I'm going to tell you that I think Barak and Seraiah are brothers. And their father, Neriah, must have been a powerful influence in these guys' lives, because Jeremiah really relies strongly on these two. So that's number one. Syria, remember, is like an ambassador. He's a prince, and he's taken to Babylon, and his name means one who prevails with God. And he's called a quiet prince. He's a peaceful, easy negotiator. He's not fiery. He's just, this is, and you can see why Zedekiah would take him. But in their interactions, it would be obvious that in their interactions with Nebuchadnezzar or with his ambassadors, that the name Jeremiah would come up. Whether Zedekiah was condemning him or whether Zariah was approval of him, it must have touched somehow to Nebuchadnezzar. And I'm going to give you that's my hypothesis as to how Nebuchadnezzar heard about Jeremiah. But also Jeremiah is a famous prophet, so word could have trickled back to Babylon in many fashions and in many ways. It could have been that when some of the captives were taken, Nebuchadnezzar and his guard were confused as to why they just walked right out and surrendered. And it's possible that, they said, well, because Jeremiah said so. Jeremiah said that God said to. So there's a lot of speculation as to how that happened. But we have this letter to Syria, and he goes into captivity, and he's supposed to do something as an act to show Babylon is going to be destroyed, and it's never going to rise again in that fashion again. And you remember in the Iraqi wars, in the Gulf Wars, we had Saddam Hussein was trying to resurrect Babylon. He thought that he was the Third Reich or the Fourth Reich, and he was going to resurrect Babylon, and he was going to be a world dominant character. Well, if he had just read Jeremiah, he would have known that that was never going to happen, because God says right there in that chapter, it's never going to rise up like that again. So anyways, a little side note, but now let's jump to Lamentation. So in the book of Lamentation, this is the timing sometimes of Lamentation is in question, but I'm going to tell you, I believe that this comes after the city has been abandoned. Okay, so he says, how doth the city sit solitary? There's a clue. Which was full of people, and how has she become a widow? It says, she weepeth, and then it goes here to verse 3. Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She findeth no rest, and all her persecutors overtook her between the straits. The ways of Zion do mourn, because none come to the solemn feasts. All her gates are desolate. Her priests sigh, her virgins afflicted, and she is in bitterness. And her adversaries are the chief, and her enemies prosper. And the Lord hath afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children are gone into captivity before the enemy. And from the daughter of Zion, none of her beauty had departed. Her princes are become like harts. And then this phrase really stands out to me. They have gone without strength before the pursuer. Anybody ever feel like you've gone forth without strength before the pursuer? I can't get this out of my mind. It's not to create a huge amount of alarm, because I know God's got it. But does anybody feel like you're like a herd of people being driven into something that ultimately is going to be just what they described? Don't you get that feel in the world today that everything is driving people to a place? And that's not it. It's okay if God's in it, and He'll protect us, just like Israel is going to be preserved. But they're going to suffer under that affliction. They're going to be preserved, but they're going to be servants. They're going to be among a heathen land. The solemn feasts are going to be stopped for a while. The priests are going to sigh, and all that goes on with that is going to be stymied. And it's going to be like that for 70 years for Israel. But do you ever get that feeling that right now in our country, we're kind of being pushed into like cattle into the stall, into the run, and then put on these, as it were, these trains and cars, and then ushered off somewhere. I can't get away from that, and part of that is our sorrow. We are kind of in this, I can't believe this is happening, sorrow, but yet We have a hope of the coming of Jesus Christ. And when we go to the book of Lamentation, which the word lamentation means sorrow, we're really looking at the sorrow of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is expressing, I think, the sorrow of the godly of the day, who have heard it was coming, saw it come, and now see the devastation and are saying, wow, this is not good for the moment. And so he goes on to tell us why these things happen. And we know why in part, but there was filthiness in her skirts. Therefore she came down wonderfully and had no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy hath magnified himself. So this is not uncommon. This is not uncommon for these cycles. This cycle of fruit bearing, and then people turning away from God, God pruning, bringing some chastisement, cutting back. They're getting their heart right again, and they bear fruit again, and then the cycle continues. But do you recall that there's also a day like when Jesus sees the fig tree and it has no fruit? He curses it. It's not fulfilled its purpose. It's no use having it there. And this is where Israel is. They're no longer bringing forth fruit. They are to be chastened and go from there. All right? So where we finally are going to go with this is over to chapter 3, where we see Jeremiah has hope again. But before we do, let's look at a couple other verses. So he says in verse 14, the yoke of my transgressions is bound by his hand. They are wreathed and come up upon my neck. He hath made my strength to fall. The Lord hath delivered me into the hands from whom I am not able to rise up. These are powerful, powerful phrases that the great prophet Jeremiah is expressing. And I underline them because I know that to some degree, less or more, I've also felt these same anguishes of heart. And I believe from my personal experience with ministry and working with folks, you have too. You've come to the place where you feel like you have no more strength and there's something pursuing you, and if there's not an intervention of God, this is over, I'm done. You also see Jeremiah talking about it in the sense that he really feels like God's brought this on him. He's taking this very personal. And remember, this isn't God on Jeremiah. This is God on the people of Jerusalem and Judah, because for the majority of them have disobeyed. But two things come out of this. Number one, we think because chastisement is going on around us that God is angry with me. That's not the case. It's going to happen because of the culture and where we are, but God's grace is always sufficient. Okay? And we think it has to do with us personally, and it doesn't. We are just in the mix of this, but we feel like we've done something wrong. We feel like it's against us. And so that's why, in a way, we want to, in the next day or so, just talk about how you kind of work through that process. You don't want to fall prey to the lie of the devil that he's actually against you when you've been doing righteously. And the devil will kind of convince you that you're the problem, and it's not it. But because of the sorrow, because of the affliction, Jeremiah in his nature is coming to that place of saying, he's against me. That isn't the case here. It isn't. And we need to kind of look at how we know that. Okay, how do we know that is not the case? Okay, so we're going to explore that a little bit and wrap it up here in the book of Lamentation, chapter number 3, and that's where we're driving to, and in the next couple of days. So when I'm in these places, and you might be in those places too, let me just give you some encouragement. When I'm in that place, that dark place, I want to encourage you, go to the Psalms. If you haven't already, maybe there's another place you go, but I go to the Psalms. The Psalms of David are very transparent. You see his You see his emotion. You see even sometimes his anger about the situation he's in. But then you see him processing it through and then giving praise unto God. Okay? Excuse me. So, with that, go with God. Don't you love the timing of sneezings? And then let God go with you, and it will be a blessing. We'll talk to you again. Bye.